Bill's experience has covered the gamut of corporate legal issues with Procopio. That includes financing, venture financing, seed financing, angel financing, and Bill has represented parties on both sides of those transactions. It includes helping companies deal with issues of conflicts of interest, helping companies set up things like stock option plans, just a number of dealing with mergers and acquisitions, helping companies develop their technologies either through getting the financing to do it, or through acquiring technologies, or through developing technologies and then disposing of them if it turns out that that's the best thing to do. And Bill has been involved in transactions of all those kinds. Bill is a graduate from undergrad of Stanford, and he got his law degree from University of Virginia, did an internship with the U.S. Supreme Court, and then switched into corporate legal matters and has been doing throughout the rest of his career has been focused on corporate legal things. I think you're going to like what you get here from Bill's presentation today. And with that, Bill, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks. Before we get started too much, I would appreciate if everyone would unmute just for a second. Please unmute. And I'd like to propose a toast with your coffee or water to Dan Ruckman for your years of service to FANG and to the community. Dan Ruckman, great American. You're here.
You're here.
You're here.
You're here.
Hey.
Cheers, Dan.
Cheers.
Okay.
Next round is on you, Dan.
Dan will send you a Starbucks gift certificate to toast him.
All right.
Anyway, I really appreciate being invited. I want to thank Dan, Jim, Reuven, and Joyce for getting this all set up. And it's great to see friends like Marvin, Don, Bill, and others. So good to see all of you again. And I'm looking forward to talking with everyone else today. I've been in your shoes where I have tried to get corporate executives to listen to reason and haven't always been listened to. Over the years, you start to realize that there are some battles you can fight and some you can't. And so, oh, Dennis, I see you there too. Good to see you. But anyway, over the years, you have a lot of challenges. I've also served on a number of boards of directors, including public company board of directors and private. And so I've been through and again saw the good, the bad, and the ugly, and can try to help those of you. Now, for some of you, I noticed like Elsa and others are going through transitions and maybe looking to be involved in various opportunities. And so I have an article that I can send to Joyce and make it available to you. And it's an article about how not to get abused by emerging companies. So when you're looking to consult and serve on boards of advisors, a lot of times you'll be offered all kinds of stock options, but the company will be valued at 100 million and they don't even have more than a PowerPoint. And so you're not going to make any money on that gig at all. And so I'll kind of list some of the risk things that you should look for those opportunities. And I'll be glad to talk with any of you if you have questions about those opportunities after the program or at other times. So please save my information. Okay.
Bill, you're going to put your contact information out for us?
Yes, and Joyce is going to send the PowerPoint, and the PowerPoint has the information. Here's the email.
Okay, good,
right
good. Okay.
William.eigner@procopio.com. If Eigner is difficult for you, don't worry. It took me about 3 years to learn, so I finally got it. Hopefully,
and people don't forget, if you misplace Bill's contact info, there is this little device out there called the internet. And you
The
can
trouble
Google
is
him.
that I don't have a name like Smith that you can, or Jones or Walker that you can look up. So Eigner took a while. There was a judge in San Diego named Weiner, but he spelled it I-E, and he's confused everyone. He didn't want to be called Wiener. So people with names that derive from Germany have I-E is usually pronounced, I-E is pronounced with the E, and E-I with the I, like Eisenhower, etc. But a few people don't want to take the medicine like Judge Wiener or Weiner, so he kind of confuses people. Anyway, let's go ahead and talk about. Um, the main difference between directors and versus officers versus advisors is that directors and officers generally have fiduciary duties, and fiduciary duties are duty of due care and duty of loyalty. Those are the main ones. Um, Advisors usually just have duties based on contract. And so that means, like in my 20 plus years of practicing law, I've never seen an advisor on someone just serving on a board of advisors getting sued. I have seen directors getting sued though. But anyway, the point is that advisors have fewer requirements. And so for those of you who are thinking about getting involved with companies, I would first test out the company by being an advisor rather than a director. Director takes a lot of time, and if the company becomes insolvent, then you have a world of headaches. And a lot of you have already been through that. And you'll advise those who haven't been through it not to go through it. But when you recruit a board, whether it's a board of directors or board of advisors, you're looking for the 4 C's: credibility, contacts, counseling, and cash. Credibility, basically like who you are, what is your experience? And so if you're building a board of advisors and you put somebody like Dan Ruckman, well, a lot of people know Dan, and you're getting credibility right out the gate. If you're doing something in San Diego and you're using Scott Butler and you're using PBO, or you're using Rick Dalside or others, you're basically getting credibility because those people have credibility. And so you're borrowing credibility to build your company. Your job as, if you're a founder of a company, you're trying to surround yourself with the best and the brightest in your field, and basically putting your face on Mount Rushmore for your field. And it creates a halo effect for your company. It's especially great for raising money. People want to see that, they want to see credibility, and it's just really important. So credibility is crucial to recruiting executives. So a lot of times people will say, hey, I've got a startup and I like your idea of boards of advisors, Bill, but I'm not going to do that till we get more established. We need to recruit some executives first. And I say, no, recruit the advisors first.
Exactly.
They're, as you'll see, that it's relatively cheap. It's relatively easy. And if you're trying to recruit executives and the executives see a credible board of advisors, they will cost much less for your company. They'll feel more confident about it. They'll be able to tell their spouse, hey, this is a great opportunity for me. Look, we have Eric Miller involved in this. So you know, he's not stupid. I mean, this is not a risk. It's a risk, but it's not a bad risk. And so consequently, you know, just by building this up, you can help recruit your executive team. Once you recruit your executive team, then it helps recruit everyone else. I had a client who was a co-founder of Qualcomm, and I learned about this technique because there was a fund in San Diego that was trying to get started during one of the really big recessions. and nobody was investing in funds. And they recruited this client of mine to be chairman of their board of advisors. And before long, everyone thought that my client was the main guy behind the fund. So basically, it gave the fund credibility and helped them raise money at a time when nobody was investing. So it can really help. Some people just have marquee value, and that is really valuable. But people looking at a company look to the team's track record. And a lot of times you're affiliated with businesses that don't really have the track record. So if you can't afford to buy the talent, rent it. And some of you are going to be the advisors. Some of you are going to help the founders build the team. Contacts. So just knowing who to recruit. Everybody can make themselves look good on paper, but certain people just don't succeed wherever they go. Knowing who those people are can be really valuable. And just so if you get an advisor who you trust and that person has contacts, they can basically help you find other executives, joint venture partners, employees, customers, and especially investors. And counseling. When you have, especially small companies, they can make maybe 2 or 3 major mistakes and then they're out of business. So getting advisors and directors who know what not to do can be really valuable. It's a lot of times people think, let's do this. And if the advisor or director has been through that, she can tell you, no, don't do that. That's dangerous. We've had a terrible time with it. And then most companies, especially early stage, are looking for cash at some point. And so your board of advisors and board of directors are a real conduit to cash, either directly or indirectly. How many of you have ever, how many of you have ever taken a life-saving course where you've, especially on the waterfront, where you rescue people? Okay, well, what you have to avoid as somebody involved with a company, you have to, what happens as when you're starting a company or you're trying to get to a different stage in your company's history, you get desperate and you want to grab on to somebody. So somebody is going to be on your board of advisors. You want them to be an executive. You want them as a consultant. You want them to find investors. You can be like the drowning person who grabs the person saving him. And so a lot of times advisors are scared off. So you need to urge the people involved to refrain from trying to do too much with each person involved. So do not press advisors or directors to invest. If you do your job properly, they will want to invest as well as bring their friends in the deal. But it's a real art form, not even when you're desperate, not to act desperate. And then recruiting. So you're basically selecting different directors and advisors for different roles. Some might be more for marquee value, like that co-founder of Qualcomm. Others might be, I have this experience and this is what not to do. Others might be connected to an important customer or potential buyer of your company. And so you want to get different people at different times and you cycle through them at different times as long as you treat people with respect. So these are just, and Joyce will make this available, but these are some of the qualities you'll want for board members. And you'll be able to see this later. And most of you already know what these things are. But companies' lawyers can be a good connection. LinkedIn can give you good ideas. I don't really like to use LinkedIn to just go out and recruit people. myself, but some of you are good at that. But I do use LinkedIn to just marshal my knowledge of who I do know. So if I'm starting a cosmeceutical company, I can look up and see that Mayor had experience with a cosmeceutical company, and Bill Laser did this, and Andy did that. And I can kind of use LinkedIn to find the right people for different things. Industry organizations are excellent sources of talent. And I'll tell you what the one of the best is FANG. So just know the other members and keep track of who's who, and you'll be able to find people who you can relate to very easily and slot them in. There are some board resources that you can see in the PowerPoint that you'll be able to have access to. So it's important to know before you go. There used to be a State Department pamphlet called Know Before You Go to make sure you didn't bring things back into the country that you shouldn't. But I use that for checking advisors and directors. And of course, like most people, I don't always practice what I preach. But theoretically, you should check references very carefully. Do database searches, kind of pre-employment type searches, because you're going to be presenting people to the outside world. Sometimes there are political issues too. For example, Qualcomm and Broadcom were not getting along. So if you put the chairman of Broadcom on your board of advisors and your goal was to get a deal with Qualcomm, that might backfire. So you have to be careful politically and be as astute as you can, but also make sure that you're not putting crooks on your board. It's not as easy as you think to just clear people. And basically, when you're doing that, you can ask the people all kinds of questions. And my belief is that a good person doesn't mind being asked these questions, and you shouldn't care what a bad person thinks. And keep in mind, we talked about how the company's needs change as you go along. And so what I like to do is use term expectations. So for instance, if I'm going to invite John to the Bill Eigner Corporation Board of Advisors, I'm going to invite him for the 2024 board. And then even if it's April, May, June, even, maybe if it's November, I might extend it, but I basically commit to the rest of the calendar year. And that way, at the end of the calendar year, I can see if he did a good job or not. And if he did a good job, I can just re-up it. If he didn't do a good job, I can thank him. I can give him a plaque that says, "Thank you for serving." And I could, and then give him a Ruth's Chris gift certificate. And he's already vested in some of his options, and I let him have options. So we part as friends. And they're like, I may have brought on Ray because Ray is connected with a potential buyer of the company. He might be associated with, he might have been a pal of Elon Musk, and I want one of Elon Musk's companies to buy my company. But it turns out that Elon hates me because of some post I had, and there's no chance that Elon's companies are going to buy my company, and Ray was brought on for that purpose. So at the end of the year, I might just say, "Ray, thank you for serving, really appreciate it. And here's a plaque for serving, and your options are still there, but you're not going to vest further. You will vest in the ones you vested so far, but that way you're not giving away options. You're not vesting options in people who are not able to help the company at that time." So we call that plaque and sack. If you
Bill,
see my
question on
office,
this.
I have a number of plaques on my wall. I didn't quite realize what they were doing at the time, but now I do. So anyway, the plaque and sack is really an important thing for boards. And same thing with boards of directors. I mean, if you ask someone to leave, if you brought Rodney on as a director and then then you tell him to leave, he's going to be insulted no matter how thick-skinned he is and no matter how experienced he is. But if you tell Rod at the beginning, Rod, I'm inviting you for the 2024 term, then he'll try really hard to get appointed to 2025, but he won't be insulted. And he won't tell his wife or friends that I got kicked off the board. He'll just say his term was over. So you don't lose face if you're the director or advisor, and the company benefits from having someone available. Dan, did you have a question?
I did. In your experience, do you ever run across where a CEO or chairman of the board is talking to a board member and telling them that their time on the board is about to be up and their options will not be continuing? Do you ever get requests from directors or advisors asking for an extension of their option period or continuing vesting or anything like that?
We'll actually cover that in a minute. Right now, in fact, I'll get to it. Okay. Because see, now most of you are familiar with option plans, stock option plans, also known as equity incentive plans. And I'll just go through these rules of thumb and then answer Dan's question. Basically, for a lot of emerging companies, we reserve 10% or 15% of the outstanding shares for an equity incentive plan. And we appoint directors and advisors for defined terms. So, so typically, like if I'm inviting Dan onto the board, I'll invite him for the calendar year 2024, but his options will vest over 2 years. So if he leaves before the end, he may not continue to vest, but he stays vested in what he already got. So this is in your materials. I'll skip that. You'll see it later. But we typically give an independent director not representing a VC typically receives 0.5% to 2%. And an advisor typically receives 0.25% to 1%. But these are rules of thumb. If Scott's company is really advanced, he may get away with issuing much less than that. If Andy's company is just a PowerPoint and nothing more, he may have to give more. So that all depends. Now, here's options usually vest monthly, the way I do it. It's different because corporate counsel is used to dealing with employees, and employees typically have a 1-year cliff and then vest over the next 3 years. So it's a total of 4 years. But with directors and advisors, they're not getting a salary. So I usually have them vest immediately starting monthly and with no cliff. And I have the vesting accelerate upon a change of control. And here's sorry for a long answer, Dan. The post-termination option exercise period should be long for directors and advisors. So typically, when you have an employee and they're getting incentive stock options, they have 60 to 90 days to exercise or their options go away. And that's not fair to a director or advisor who didn't get a salary. And most of you, or a lot of you, will serve as directors or advisors. So this is something to really fight for. You want a long post-termination exercise price. I mean, it could be 7 years. It doesn't need to be 2 to 3 months. And corporate counsel will fight with you over that. But you'll just say, hey, Bill Eigner told me this, and that's what I'm sticking to. And so you'll get it. But it won't come easy because a lot of people just disagree with that. But I think it's crucial. I learned the hard way as an advisor. I was an advisor to a company for about 4 or 5 years. They were struggling terribly. Finally, they were sold to a big publicly traded company, and it was about to be, but that happened. That was only if I could see the future. When they changed over in management, the new management basically said we're terminating the advisors. And at that point, I had 30 to 90 days to decide if I'm going to write a check to the company to exercise my options. And I didn't know if I should or shouldn't. So I exercised some of my options, but not all. Well, it turned out they got purchased by a public company and for a large price. And so I basically forewent, basically lost out on a lot of value just because I had such a short exercise period. So after that, I determined I want a long exercise period post termination. And all of you should want that too if you're going to be an advisor or director. Did that answer the question, Dan?
It did partly, and I guess I'd be curious, do you ever have the discussion to that point and then kind of representing the company, and then the director comes back and kind of pushes back, says, well, yeah, I know that in the agreement by which I got these options, it said such and such, but it really would make sense for you to extend my options a little further for the following reasons. Do you ever get into that kind of a discussion?
Oh, yeah, that happens quite frequently, especially with departing executives. You can do that. It's best to do it before they lapse.
Right.
Otherwise, it's quite complicated. But yeah, that does happen, and the board can extend them. And the board, it may change the character of the options to make them they're not going to be ISOs anymore, possibly.
Right.
But
which I think has
a
a
times
90-day.
the executive is happy. But I see this more with executives leaving than directors or advisors. But it does happen, and people beg for extensions, and it often happens.
Good. Yeah, great. Thanks.
So when you're dealing with directors and advisors, it's important not to keep it a secret. It's also important to make sure that you consult with them. And if you agree to be an advisor or director, you should make sure that you retain approval rights for any press releases or use of your name or likeness. So you don't, for example, if they do a PowerPoint raising money, you don't want, and it's a risky company, you don't want Nandin listed as like, invest in this company because Nandin said so. You don't want to be used or abused that way. You want the right to be able to approve how they use your, what you endorse or what you impliedly endorse. So, but if you're the company, you want to be able to use your advisors and directors in a strategic way and make sure that you have news releases and you put them on your website and you include them in your decks, your slide decks. But you just have to make sure that you get permission. So, sorry about my phone here. The best advisors can be promoted to directors. I don't believe in bringing somebody on a board of directors unless I can test them first. The only exception to that is if you're venture backed and your venture capital investor insists upon board representation, then you take whatever you get. But if you have the choice, I would not put anyone on a board of directors until you've tried them out as advisors, because they can hire and fire your team. And we all think that will never happen. But as a lot of us know, many times investors come and they, whoops, I'm losing this somehow. Sorry about this. I think I lost my PowerPoint. Can you hear me though?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Good. Sorry about that.
Sure.
But I think I put on some weight and my stomach must have hit the keyboard Oh, well. Anyway, that actually came right at the end of my presentation anyway. It would have become the end anyhow, but coincidentally it was. But I'm here to take questions. But basically, what I'm saying is, and it should be the same for anything, a lot of times you can use your board of advisors as a way to decide who should be a director, and use your directors sometimes as a way to decide who should be CEO. So it's good to have people who are familiar with the company, incentivized to see it grow, and have them available to help the company as you go. But I'm available for questions. And for those of you who don't want to ask a question publicly, you're welcome to contact me later.
Hey, Bill, I spent most of my career in Silicon Valley, in executive positions, and I was a member of the VC task force for a number of years, and I've seen it all, the same things you've seen legally. And, the one thing that's concerning is the fact that before you get involved in any of these companies, to my feelings are, whatever the role is, you really need to be sure that you're safe from the standpoint that they have officers and directors, insurance protection in case of lawsuits, number one, because again, your credibility. And two, a lot of times you really need to examine who the management team is. It's not a question of them examining you, but you really need to find out who these people are, what their reputations are, and what they've done in the past. Because once they start using your name, it gets out there, and especially with all the VCs in Silicon Valley, for example, and small companies, because you have the credibility issue going forward. So that, to me, that's the biggest concern I have going forward.
That's exactly right. Now, as a director, you definitely need D&O insurance. As an advisor, you need to do your due diligence, but you normally don't need the D&O insurance. The other thing that a lot of you know this, but it's a dirty little secret that D&O insurance is not uniform, and it's not all good. And here's the worst part of it. The worst part I've learned as a director is that that companies won't renew you if you don't have any money. So they won't renew your D&O policy if you're running on fumes while you're trying to do an offering to bring in money. You're not covered by your D&O anymore. That's a catch-22. You have to have the money to get the D&O insurance, and you have to have the D&O insurance to have the right people on board to raise the money. So see if you can negotiate for automatic renewals. See if you try to prepay your D&O insurance if you have a company that has its ups and downs, but and don't let it lapse. And also take a very close look at the terms of the D&O policy, because they're not all equal. And Dennis brings up a good point. By the way, Dennis has a really great series of presentations and predictions that he makes on a show that he has, a podcast that I recommend to everybody. It's really enlightening.
Hey, Bill, can you talk about nonprofit boards and the recommended size for nonprofit boards, and then also about whether they should pressure their board of directors to contribute to the nonprofit?
Well, it really depends what kind of nonprofit. If it's a 501c3, they should give some money. But see, the trouble is, it's kind of like how I was talking about the drowning person, how you want something from somebody and you drown them along with yourself. You can do that with a nonprofit board too if you're not careful. So usually what people do is they entice you. And I've been enticed early in my career. I didn't know any better, and somebody invited me to an American Jewish Committee board, and they said, "Bill, we only meet three times a year, and it's no big deal, and you can do this in your sleep." So I was really busy as a young associate, but I did it, and and I went to the 3 meetings, but I found out that everyone went to committee meetings. And so I got there and I made comments on things, and they said, well, if you had been at the committee, you would have known. And so they didn't appreciate the comments if you're not rolling up your sleeves and getting involved. So it kind of works. On the one hand, they wanted to recruit me, and they kind of like undersold how difficult it would be. And on the other hand, they wanted a lot out of me once I was there. So Bill, it's hard to find the right mix, but I think maybe you're going to be trying people out, and just expect that some will make it and some won't. But you don't want to lose friends by them parting ways with you, acting disappointed in them. So it's really hard to find the exact way. My dad was really active in a lot of nonprofits as a volunteer, and he was more like an IRS agent going after people. So I don't recommend that.
Yeah, I just did a strategic planning session with a board that has 14 people, and it was the nonprofit board. And there were 4 of us doing the presentation, a marketing person, an advertising person, and a social impact nonprofit person, as well as me as the strategic planning guy. And after the presentation, they liked what we did because it was pro bono. And they said, hey, would you like to join the board? But one of the things that they mentioned in the meeting was they want all the board members to contribute to the company. So then I'm like, okay, yeah, you want me to join because you want my money, right?
Sure.
Yeah, but I suggest that for nonprofits, some of them want a really big board because it costs money and it's prestigious. Like the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce, I served on that board, and there must have been about 50 to 80 people. I forget how many, but what works most effectively is to have an executive committee and have the executive committee really hands-on. The big problem with nonprofit boards is that the directors aren't that engaged, and many directors, if they even show up at the meetings, don't read their packet of materials till the meeting, if at all. So
Exactly. That's one thing
yeah,
we found, that we prepared a nice pre-meeting package. It was a 5-hour session, and it was a significant amount of work. And when people looked at it a few minutes before the meeting, they go, "Oh, wow, there's a lot of meat here. We're really going to have to do something." And so, yeah, the people that were on the executive committee, I think, took a harder look at it, and they were prepared. But the rest of the board members were not as well prepared as they could have been for the 5-hour
yeah,
meeting
and
result.
people keep reading, Bill. They keep reading these articles, and every so often a young attorney will give a lecture to a board, a nonprofit board, about how they're at risk if they don't do their job. But I think their eyes glaze over because I haven't really seen many instances where a nonprofit board got into trouble for doing a poor job. So it's one of those things that it's like an urban myth that you're going to get in trouble. Unfortunately, it should be taken more seriously, but it's not.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Bill.
Hey, Bill, I think one thing that I forgot to mention earlier, and that is that you really need to look at the quality of the people that are advisors and also directors and members of the board before you decide to become a member of the family. I think that's really critical in terms of, the contribution they can make, what they've done in their industry experience to be a member of their board of directors or to be part of the team before you decide to become a member of their organization.
I think you're exactly right. And that can't be understated. Now, the thing is, no matter how careful you are, you're going to make mistakes, or
Right.
your needs will change. And that's why we set this up so that you can change out board members without offending them. That's why we have the terms. We also, in the agreement, you can terminate someone immediately if you want, and they can quit immediately if they want. But typically, you let it run till the end of the year. I suggest you use calendar years because it's hard to keep track of if you do it 1 year from appointment and someone's appointed April 2nd, and then you have to wait till April 2nd, 2025 to keep track. It's too hard to keep track. But if you have end of the year, it's a lot easier. There's another thing that may help those of you like Elsa and others who may serve as advisors or directors. If you go on a board of advisors, be prepared for the company to start treating you like you're a consultant or an employee. And usually that's not really the role. The role, like I serve on a number of boards of advisors, and my role is not to start drafting legal documents. That's what a lawyer does. I'm more making introductions, helping them recruit people, that sort of thing. If they start asking me to draft documents, then I'll say, I think you better retain Procopio, and we'll help you draft those documents. If you're asking Elsa to do some kind of big report, or start contacting potential customers or acquisition partners, then Elsa needs to get a new kind of contract. It could be just a regular consulting agreement, or it could be she'll get paid hourly, whatever it is, it's
Sure.
beyond being an advisor or a director. So just don't be used or abused. And again, I'll make this available to Joyce for all of you to see, that article about how not to get used or abused by an emerging company.
If I can add a comment on the subject that was talked about a minute or so ago about being asked to provide financial support to the organization as a board member. There's a true story here in San Diego, and it's probably about maybe 10 or a dozen years or so ago. A very well-known wealthy guy in town was recruited to the board of a very well-known nonprofit organization. And they said they weren't interested in his money. They wanted his name to add credibility, and they wanted his advice.
Sure.
And he made it very clear that, okay, but those are the terms under which I'm joining. And I just want to warn you, if anyone comes to me at some point down the road and asks me for money, I'm gone. Because I was promised that that's not what you want me for. And he actually made that explicitly clear so that the company, the organization, would not think that they could just, and this is a guy who had no shortage of funds. He was one of the wealthiest guys in town. But he made it very clear that they had made it clear to him they didn't want his money, and he expected them to honor that.
That's important. One other topic that I wanted to touch on is the idea of, especially with a board of directors, obviously you're going to have meetings. With a board of advisors, I don't usually recommend that you have them meet all together. And here's why. A lot of times, especially for an emerging company, you're looking to convince these folks to possibly invest or help find investment. And if you ever have pitched to a group or been part of a group that was pitched to, you realize an important problem in those groups. For example, Tech Coast Angels and others. If you pitch to a group of people who don't know each other really, really well, the way that you would impress your fellow participants is like Mark might say, hey, there's a problem here. I've seen this before. And Nandan might say, yeah, and what about this? And so the way you establish yourself as a smart person is you find a problem. And so if you're the sponsor, the company sponsoring the board of advisors, you don't want that, especially for people that you're looking for help from, and you don't want to discourage them because one of them might find a problem that another might not. I mean, you want their feedback, but you want it individually normally. Same thing with raising funds in general. I had a client that was raising money for a telecom company. He lived in Rancho Santa Fe and invited his neighbors and friends to the inn at Rancho Santa Fe, had a really beautiful breakfast brunch on a Sunday, mimosas and all kinds of great eggs Benedict. People are there. And then he gave a talk about the company and then opened it to questions. And his next door neighbor says, who's a friend of his, says, well, I was with AT&T for 10 years, and you're talking about doing a deal with AT&T. They're not interested in this technology. They went with something else. They'll never do this deal. So everybody just kind of finished their mimosas, put it down, and left. Not a single person in the group invested. And that's what happens. Ever since then, I've never encouraged group presentations, and the same thing for boards of advisors. It's just one person can really blow it for the whole company. And so you have to be careful. Other questions or comments?
Yes, Bill, I just had a question, given your experience, in working with a range of companies. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Voice is coming okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, very well.
So it's a bit of a strange question, but I'd like to I was curious if you've come across this situation before where you have a company that's going public, and it has a whole bunch of people on the board that are brought in for their expertise. I'll give you a specific example because, I've advised a number of boards and management teams over the years, and I've seen situations where for fintech companies that they get a board full of tech investors and tech experts who have no clue that the product is actually a loan, and the risks are credit risk, funding risk, liquidity risk. So what they thought they were joining was a completely different company and with completely different risks and, growth parameters and profitability metrics and what the company is being held to by, the stock market. So have you come across situations like that? Because I've seen, these board members will join and then the company will be sold as a certain story to investors and then inevitably blows up. And then you see all these board members and leaving. But have you seen people proactively actually realizing, hey, wait a second, like this is not what I thought it was, and like leaving the board sooner than expected?
Well, Samir, I've seen situations where people thought they should leave, but decided to hold on because they wanted their payday. So they thought, hey, I've dedicated so much time to this company. I've gotten options, but very little else. And it also depends on how their options vest and how quickly they have to exercise. If they have a long exercise period and they've pretty much vested, they're more likely to do the right thing and resign if they're not able to help the company go that direction. So I think people do the right thing, but it's best to align their interest with doing the right thing.
Yeah. And then the other thing I was curious about is just from some of the comments you made earlier, and the role of the board relative to the management team. I've often found, and it's actually been a surprise to me, how disengaged a lot of boards are relative to what one would expect in terms of appropriate governance. And you see management teams making a lot of mistakes, throwing away money into certain, pet projects and investments, which is apparent to everybody else in the company, but the management team and the board. And so given the, legal liability for board members, one would think that they'd be more vigilant, but it's been my experience that they're really not as engaged as they should be. I don't know if you've come across that, if anyone else has.
Unfortunately, yeah. And I've also helped executives who are dealing with their board or founders who basically are still on the board but not CEO anymore. And the VCs place people on the board, and then they bring in sometimes, like especially with founders who are women, they'll be replaced by a man, and the man will be like some senior guy, but not a very hands-on type person, and kind of a know-it-all personality, and run the company into the ground. And then the founder will contact me and say, "What can we do?" And And usually, do I threaten to sue? Do I just try to form alliances with other board members? And a lot of times you're trying to form alliances with other board members, and you're trying to take the Abraham Lincoln approach of getting along with people until you can bring them along to your point of view. So it's difficult to be that diplomatic, but sometimes you'll start out with you're the only one in the room who thinks the CEO is running the company into the ground, and you try to find kindred spirits and create an alliance and try to get help for the CEO and eventually replace him or her. But it's very difficult. And there's a real disincentive, because even if you just, like, for instance, they want to do some financing that you think is ill-advised and you abstain in the vote, some people treat that as hostile and you're not a team player. And so it's really hard to be independent, and it's also hard to get your point across if you're just a person of principle who doesn't know how to play the game. So it's so difficult to, I mean, if you were telling your children, follow the golden rule, always do this, but in practice, it's a lot harder to do. And you may have to ask yourself later, why did I vote for that? And you tell yourself, well, I had to go along with that so that I could help the company on the next vote because I don't want to be seen as hostile. So it's difficult. The boardsmanship is, a lot of you have seen this, and Samir, you probably have, in fact, seen this yourself. That's just very, very difficult. But you try to, look at the end in mind, which is helping the company and its shareholders.
Great.
Hey,
Thank you.
Bill, what I've seen a lot of in my career, and that is you have what I would call the life cycle of early stage companies. And what happens is they start going, you have a board of directors, let's say that Dan Ruckman's on the board, and you see as the company grows and develops, the company goes to the next levels, and you find people that are in executive positions don't have the skill sets to take that company and their specific functional area to the next level. And typically, if you get money from VCs or private equity, they're always going to insert somebody to the board of directors. And over time, what I've seen happen is that the CEO moves to the side because he's very technical, but he's really not a good manager type of thing, including the CTO, et cetera. They're moved aside, they're given other roles in the company, and then you move on. And the same thing I've seen happen with advisors, as well as directors and board members that can't go to the next level and they're replaced. And I've seen that happen with companies in Silicon Valley that have gone public, and you know who they are. And that happens all the time. It's part of the evolutionary product. The
Right.
problem you have is you want to watch out for the liability issues where people get in a contest, if you will, threatening to sue each other. And all that does is it damages the reputation of the company, because that information gets out to the public and it gets out to your customers, the 10 people you're trying to raise money for. So it's really a sticky wicket. And I've seen a lot of that, too much of that, if you will. And that's why you have to be careful about who you decide to be in the rowboat with before you jump in and have an oar.
Yeah, and Dennis, that's true. And the trouble is that it all depends on your point of view. So
Right.
I tell our founders that if you're taking venture money, you have to take into account that many of them don't want to, but they expect that they will do a control alt delete on management at some point. And that means you, and that means you could get diluted afterward. And so try to protect yourself accordingly. And there are only so many things you can do. But it's, on the other hand, representing VCs, they're thinking, hey, we put in our hard cash. This guy basically got all these shares that he paid 0.00001 cent per share. And we paid, real hard cash money for our shares. And here's this guy, he promised us the moon and the stars and he hasn't delivered. And so So we, the next time he needs money, we're going to punish him with our term sheet. And if he can raise money elsewhere, fine. But that's what we're going to do. And we're not going to want him in there as CEO anymore. And so you kind of see it from both sides. But it's a very difficult and messy game for people. And there are certain things that you can only protect yourself so far. And even people who have really good character, they see themselves with conflicting responsibilities, and they sometimes will be harsh. So it's really tough for founders, especially.
The big, Bill, you see I see a big differentiation or distinction, if you will, between a quote nonprofit and a profit-bound organization in terms of the quality of the members and in terms of what their direction and strategic objectives are. And I think, to me, they're two distinctly different organizations going forward. And I think you have to decide which playground you want to play in, if you will, so to speak. Whether you want to be in the nonprofit side or the other side, they're very different.
Yeah, the nonprofits achieve so much, and they're great organizations, many of them. But I personally enjoy the for-profit ones because I think the directors take it much more seriously as a role.
Right.